So hello, my name is Ann Hallmuller. I'm the new director of the Saratoga County History Center. It's great to see all of you. Hope I see you at Brookside as well. But we're so glad to see you out here in Victory in this wonderful building. Thank you, Sean, for renting this for us. We really appreciate it. It's a wonderful space. Thank you to the village for sharing it with us as well. It's a wonderful space and we're very happy to be here. It's very nice to get out of the building and sort of see new places all over the county, so we're very excited. We hope also to have you come to Brookside for our upcoming events, including our Artisans Market, which is running from Thanksgiving up till Christmas. So if you have any holiday gifts to pick out for the year, please do stop by. That will be running. To make things short, I'm going to introduce Field Horn, who will introduce Nick Sisto. Field Horn is the former director of Brookside, as well as its acting curator from 2021 until 2025. Field Horn.
Thank you, Ann. So, in fact, when I was director in the early 80s, I was curious about Victory, and I wrote a little essay that we published in our then newsletter called The Gristmill. It's not very good. It's okay. But that was all there was, because there's really never been a book about Victory. I returned to the museum after 30 years during COVID, and I found we had 6 shelves of huge ledgers from the Saratoga Victory Manufacturing Company. They came to us in 2002. I can't remember the name of the woman who brought them to us. My suspicion is that she was on the staff of Clevepack at the end, and that she grabbed them when the building was being emptied out. These are the business records of the corporation from the first day it operated in 1846 until the year 1900. Wow. It's world class. I mean, you know, Harvard Business School would love to have them to add to their records of business. A year ago, I taught a course on vernacular landscape in Skidmore. I had 15 students. We explored. We went out on Wednesdays. We went to the battlefield. We went to the hand mill and farm. We did classwork as well. And several students were standouts. One student, Nicholas Sisto, I invited to develop an independent research project to learn historical research. And so you have a rare privilege tonight to hear the story of Victory Mills from a competent, though young, historian. Nick Sisto is a native of Appleton, Wisconsin, also a paper mill town like Schuylerville and Victory. He's a junior at Skidmore, majoring in history and political science, with an interest in urban planning as a possible career. And a fun fact, he's a passionate jazz saxophonist and plays in 4 separate ensembles on the craft. So please welcome Nick Sisto.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nick. Thank you to Field Horn. Yeah, you introduced me. I got to cut out my first section here. Hold up. Perfect. All right. Hi, my name is Nick. I'm a student at Skidmore College, a junior. Of course, I'm from Appleton, Wisconsin, another mill town up on the Fox River over there. Just a disclaimer, I've never done something like this before. So this is a first for me. When I embarked on this research process in January of this year, I'd taken 3 college history courses, and that's it. So this has completely broadened my horizons in terms of what's possible, not only in the research, but also in how I can bring this to a community and how the community can benefit from it. And of course, I believe my final draft I submitted was on May 30th. On May 31st, there was a fire right down the street at the 1918 mill, and it burned to the ground. So that just brings a whole new heaviness, but also just importance to this project, and I'm really happy I get to share it with you. So, just a basic introduction to my process. So when I first started out on this, as Field mentioned, there was really nothing on this subject before. There's a brief mention in the National Register. It was registered in. There was, of course, Field's little paper, and a couple other things around that were published here and there, but nothing concrete, nothing substantive that's really I can go off of. So I just started by pulling any threads I can find off Google, off archives, and off those business ledgers we found at the Brookside Museum. And so a lot of my research came from newspaper archives, which I don't know if I'm assuming many of you haven't looked at old newspapers from the 19th century, but they went through everything. Anybody who visited town, anybody who left town, if someone had an argument, it was in the paper. So it's all great, and I couldn't possibly fit all of what I found in a presentation or even in a paper as thick as this one. But it was all amazing. My research also took me to the Harvard Business School, where I looked at some old business and credit reports there, and you can see a couple of pictures of them there. And it brought me here to that table, where I got to look through some old minutes from the Village of Victory. This one, perfect. So here's just a basic timeline. Don't worry, I don't expect you to read all of it, but it just goes through the basics. In this project, I limited myself just to the era where Victory Mills functioned as a textile manufacturing plant, so where it made cloth and clothes and sheets and stuff like that. If I tried to write from when Victory was founded in 1846 to 2025, I think that would be maybe a bit much for 3 months of work, but I limited myself to this, and this is a basic timeline of what I came up with. So the mill functioned as a textile mill from the year 1846 to the year 1929, where the mill closed down. So this location, Fish Creek, which is right down there, is probably one of the best spots you can have and imagine for a mill. From Victory here to where it reaches the Hudson at Schuylerville, the creek drops roughly 100 feet in elevation, which for that short of a span is crazy. If you've been down there, you can see the rapids. It just goes and goes and goes. And that was great for water power, which was how mills were powered before steam engines were invented. And also at Schuylerville, at the time in the 1830s, the Champlain Canal was built right along the Hudson River, which brought ship traffic right to Schuylerville. So Victory, even though it seemed isolated, far away from any major city, it was really connected to the world at the time when it was being prospected. So the site was set. An amazing place for textile mill. Someone just needed to act on that site. And that man was a man called Enoch Reddington Mudge. Mudge was a wealthy businessman who was born in Maine, and he made his fortune in New Orleans in the hotel business. In 1845, he came back to the Northeast to look for new business ventures. He somehow learned of the Victory Mill site and set the steps in motion to build a textile mill on the site. From 1845 until his death in 1881, Mudge owned multiple mills and a company that managed their exports. But Victory Mills was his first venture into the industry. And although he was the point man on the operation, he wasn't their sole investor. And I thought something that might be topical for today, which is Veterans Day, is that he built a number of churches in his son's honor, namely St. Stephen's Memorial Church in Lynn, Massachusetts, his son who died at Gettysburg in the Civil War. This advertisement was published in the Lowell Daily Courier on January 6, 1846. And this was an advertisement out to any businessmen, any manufacturers who were looking to expand their operations and who were looking for a new site to build. This advertisement, as contacts, were Coleman and Stetson, who were owners of the Astor House Hotel in New York, where Mudge used to work as a manager. Benjamin Marshall, who was an English-born entrepreneur, and he constructed an early cotton mill down in Troy. Benjamin Losey, a local landowner, and of course, Enoch Mudge. And this is who answered the call. Mudge managed to secure investments from two other wealthy businessmen from his new home in Massachusetts, a dry goods merchant and ship outfitter called David Nevins, and his father-in-law, a whaler and merchant, Jared Coffin. Coffin was the least involved out of the three, Already 62 at the time that he was approached. He provided funds towards construction, but he seemingly didn't interfere with the business at all. Although his son, Roland Guelston Coffin, moved to the village and served as the village's first postmaster when the post office opened in 1852. And that postmaster lived in that third house over there on Herkimer Street, that third brick house. And yes, the fire department right behind this wall is named after David Nevins. David Nevins was much more involved in the mill's operations. He was one of the exporters of the mill's goods, and he was considered one of the major shareholders. Victory Mills was his first venture into the manufacturing business, but he would later become much more infamous as one of his other ventures, the Pemberton Mill in Lawrence, Massachusetts, collapsed, killing 98 workers. Yes, very severe. So a little bit of context behind what was happening here. So industrial mechanized textile manufacturing began in England in the mid-18th century. The English were very, very, very secretive about their technology, and they wouldn't let anyone else copy or lease or anything of their designs. It was first introduced into the United States when a Rhode Island merchant named Moses Brown and an English mill worker named Samuel Slater colluded to copy mill machine designs and set up their own mill in Rhode Island in 1789. Francis Cabot Lowell brought textile mills to a new scale as his mills in Massachusetts began hiring young women as his primary workforce. And this map was probably, which I believe is the first map ever of Victory. Very cool. Around the time Mudge was searching for investors in early 1846, Benjamin Losey, the local landowner, and a local civil engineer named Peckham Green were sent to survey the land in and around Victory. This map, produced in 1846 and updated in 1855, is the earliest map of Victory Mills that I'm aware of. As you can see, the road layout there isn't the same road layout you see today, and a lot of what was planned, namely right around here, was actually never built. It was actually a plat for the village that was never built. And you can see the name there, the Saratoga Water Power Company. That was just the shadow company that owned the water rights at the time. So it didn't have much influence on the story of Victory.
Back in that slide, can you point out to people where the water canal was?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, I'll get back to that later too. But right over here, you can see where Fish Creek comes down, and it hits a dam here. The water was then funneled through this canal, through the mill, through a water wheel, and sent out a tail race here back into Fish Creek, and that powered the mill. So once the site was set, and it was an amazing site, the Dream Team incorporated the Saratoga Victory Manufacturing Company and started construction on a mill building and housing for workers. The mill was estimated to cost $425,000 at the time, which is roughly $17.6 million today. And the original mill building was a long 3-story brick rectangle at the foot of Pond Street, right down here. And then a later on expansion was built just 3 years later in 1849 that went perpendicular to the current building. Also built were a number of brick and wooden tenements along Gates Avenue and overseers' homes on Herkimer Street and above. So all these buildings here and here were tenements for workers at the time. And buildings up here were housing for more overseers and skilled workers. Okay. The mill began operations on July 1st, 1847, under the management of a man named Mayo Pond, after who Pond Street is named after. By 1850, the mill contained 12,500 spindles and 309 looms, and it employed 160 men and 309 women. The average textile mill in New York had 73 workers. Victory Mills had 369. It was a massive business, and in 1850, 6% of all textile mill workers in the state of New York worked right here at Victory Mills. And 1850 was less than 5 years after the site was surveyed to begin with. So all of that happened just in a very short span. Right here is a look inside the mill, the 1846 mill, and this view comes from around the year 1900. And as a complete textile mill, the basic business process was that the Victory Mills would take raw cotton, it would spin the cotton into thread, and then after that, it would then weave that thread into fabrics. Raw cotton was imported from the South, specifically in this newspaper article from Alabama. And from there, it would be shipped up either by barge or by rail when the rails came in 1882, or by a combination of both. As you can see in this article here, the raw cotton was floated up the river, up the Tennessee, and then up the Mississippi River to Cairo, Illinois, and then shipped by rail to somewhere nearby Victory, and then floated to Victory. These supply chains were very complex at the time, before the rail network truly connected the entire country. The Saratoga Victory Manufacturing Company purchased the Horicon Mill in Schuylerville in 1857. Both mills were operated in tandem for most of the company's history. And the Horicon Mill was located right where the dam is today, kind of right at the intersection of the Fish Creek and the Champlain Canal. Operated 23,000 spindles for spinning thread and 531 looms for weaving thread into fabric. The mill produced a variety of fabrics and products, from industrial sheeting to household goods. The dyeing department was in operation from the late 1850s to 1882, and it dyed fabrics in many different colors. So I'd like to take just a minute and break down this map right here. So this is a fire insurance map from Victory Mills that was produced sometime in the late 1800s, around the 1890s or so. And you can see the old mill in its final form. So right in this long building here, this was the original mill. It was expanded from 3 stories to 5 or 6 stories. And there was expansion here, and there was a bunch of add-ons later on. Later on, a boiler was added to add steam power right down here. And that would supplement, at the time, it would supplement the water power that came in. So water would come in from Fish Creek right down here. It would then flow into mill and power a water wheel. And the water wheel would spin around, and it would shoot off its energy into multiple belts, kind of just leather straps that went around rollers. And they would be transferred with pulleys and with gears to change the speeds and stuff like that. So that one speed of the water going over the wheel, that would power every single different machine they had. And I mean, if you think of the modern day machines where most of them are electric or gas powered, where each of them had their own engine, that was amazingly complex for the time. And the man behind this golden age of textile production, roughly 1850, when the mill was firmly established, to around 1880, that man was a man named Charles Wadsworth Mayhew. And he oversaw daily operations from 1858 to 1879, almost 20 years, over 20 years, after Mayo Pound retired. He was probably the most influential man in Victory after the founder Mudge. This photo here is from the 1866 Beers Atlas of Saratoga County. The village of Victory Mills was incorporated in 1849 to serve the needs of the community that sprang up around the mill. It would later be reincorporated in 1870 as the Village of Victory, although the post office retains the name Victory Mills, and colloquially, it's known very often as Victory Mills. As you can see here, this is a 1910 view of Gates Avenue, right down there. Looks very different to today, but you can see brick tenements and shops lined up all along the street. The Saratoga Victory Manufacturing Company laid out the plat of the village when the mill was under construction. Tenements and worker housing were on Gates Avenue, and the streets above it hosted grander residence for more skilled workers and overseers. The village took the name Victory Mills after the company that founded it, who in turn took their name after the victory in the Revolutionary War that took place just nearby. Gates Avenue and Herkimer Street are both named for Revolutionary War generals. So the name of my whole project was the company and its town, Textile Productions in Victory Mills and the community around it. So what's a company town? There's a lot of academic discourse out there, but I've kind of distilled it to three criteria I like. In a company town, there's one primary employer. The employer usually maintains housing for their employees and their families, and the employer usually maintains services for the community. In short, a company town is where the town and the company are inseparable. Victory was a very early example of a company town. It joined Lowell, another very known company town, and other mill towns around the area, but it was very early in the process. Most other company towns who followed this model of a major employer popped up around the 1880s and later when the railroads really took over and connected the country. So a company town, a main quality of it is that it provided services for its residents. And a big one that the Victory Manufacturing Company did was it built churches. The Victory Manufacturing Company donated land for our Union Methodist Church up on Herkimer Street, right down there, that was stood from 1854 to sometime in the 1920s. And it also provided land for St. Stephen's Episcopal Church in Schuylerville, built in 1868, and another Catholic church in Schuylerville that's no longer in operation. The schoolhouse, that's where we are. The schoolhouse was built in 1872 to replace the wooden one that had burned down. And it was built with a lot of funding from the Victory Manufacturing Company. It consolidated with the Schuylerville 1940s, and it ceased operating as a school in 1955. These photos right here, here's a class photo from 1948, looking very sharp. I appreciate all the coats. And right here is a headline where teachers right here at the Victory Schoolhouse, they took students to visit a bunch of mills in the area, including the Victory Mill right down the street. Here's another early 20th century view of the schoolhouse. The fire department. The David Nevins Fire Department was organized in 1896. It was reorganized in 1948 as the Devin Nevins Fire Department. Right here, the top photo is an 1890 photo of the Mill Fire Department. The Mill operated their own fire department separate from the Village Fire Department. And down right here is a 1950 photo of the fire department, the Village Fire Department, and their truck. Victory Mills Fire Department won state championship very early, sometime in the 1910s. And you can see the famous hand pumper, which you might see on parades or display around here. The railroad was the next revolution to come through Victory. The Saratoga and Schuylerville Railroad, a division of the Fitchburg Railroad, built a rail spur from Saratoga Springs to Schuylerville. It began construction in 1875, and it began serving the village in 1882. The Fitchburg Railroad was bought by the Boston and Maine Railroad in 1910. And this railroad connected Victory to the whole region. As you can see, the railroad started at Saratoga Springs, went along Fish Creek, made some stops here, up through Victory Mills, and through to Schuylerville. The Victory train station was located on the southeast corner of Gates Avenue and Pine Street. The railroad was in use from 1882 to 1955. The tracks are torn up in 1957. And as you can see from this bird's eye view, the railroad entered the village and left the village on trestles, which are wooden foundations that a railroad would build tracks over and use to cross bodies of water. The rail line ran down Gates Avenue, right down there, and then up Green Street, stopping where the central school is today, up in Schuylerville. There were stations at the end of the line by the school and at the corner of Gates Avenue and Burgoyne Street in Schuylerville. The Gates Avenue station, this guy right here, the end of the line station was torn down in January of last year. Schuylerville and Victory were super interconnected and still are. They shared an employer. The Horicon Mill and the Victory Mill were owned by the same company, and people went between them every day to go shopping, to socialize, and to see each other. Super excitingly to me, and something I found as a saxophone player, Victory had a band, and they were awesome. The Victory Mills Band, in operation from at least 1880 to the 1940s, was well-renowned around the region. They performed in Albany, in Schenectady, and on Saratoga Lake often. They were a cornerstone of the community at the time and were very well known. Victory Mills also had a number of other community groups, including a baseball team, the Victory Mills Stars, who existed from at least the 1880s to the 1940s, a basketball team from the 1900s to the 1930s, and a football team from 1900 to 1915. And this photo is a photo of the band up in Schuylerville in 1904. Victory grew super fast. By 1848, the village had around 500 people. That was 2 years after the village was surveyed to begin with. By 1860, it was over 600 people. 1870, almost 900. And at its peak in 1880, the village of Victory had 1,120 people, only 200 less than nearby Schuylerville. In the beginning, most residents were Yankee Americans, farm girls and farm boys coming in from the countryside for work. Soon, an influx of Irish immigrants flooded the village, and by 1860, it was roughly split half and half with Irish and Yankee residents. I haven't personally done the later genealogical research into the rest of the village's history, but it would have surely followed broad immigration trends with more Irish and Italian immigrants. From 1850 to 1880, the mill usually employed between 400 and 600 workers in the mill. And the mill usually had a ratio of around 2 to 1 women to men. Around twice as many women worked at the mill as opposed to men. The women working there were overwhelmingly young, sometimes as young as 13 or 14. And the men varied in age from boys to much older men who worked more skilled and more strenuous positions. Starting in the late 1870s, signs of trouble started to develop in the mill's operations, signs that would eventually lead to the mill's demise 50 years later. The mill and the village would never reach their peak population and employment that they had in 1880. A multitude of factors contributed to the mill's decline and ultimate closure. And I'm going to get a little technical here, but I hope you'll bear with me. Graphs, I'm sorry. After the Civil War, there was a massive railroad building boom across the country, and this connected the country's economy like it had never been before. All of this was part of what would come to be called the Second Industrial Revolution. All this investment came to a head in 1873, when overinvestment and global connectivity caused bank failures and market crashes that led to a recession. Known in America at the time as the Great Depression, superseded later on in 1929, and worldwide as the Long Depression. It lasted from 1873 to 1879. The economy contracted, prices plummeted, the dollar deflated, and so did wages. This directly led to labor movements in the 1870s and 1880s. The economy recovered somewhat in 1879, but it remained turbulent. It would remain turbulent for the next 30 years when the economy picked back up to support World War I. In 1874, as a response to the depression at the time, the Victory Manufacturing Company decided to start reducing wages. Wages were reduced in 1874 and again in 1875, resulting in a total reduction of around 15%. The mill decreased production in the summer of 1876 and totally ceased production that winter. In response to wage cuts, the dyers, the people who worked in the dyeing department, struck in April 1876, The strikers were seemingly fired, and their positions were rehired. As you can see here, different newspapers had different biases. One newspaper, in that April 1876 strike, claimed that the strikers assaulted other workers on their way out. This is not corroborated by any other newspaper. On May 16th, 1879, the weavers struck in response to unfair pay after all the concessions to the dyers were made. These strikes were before the labor movement came into its own, and when strikers often lacked much organization and lacked formal unions. Many strikes were put down with violence. Later on, many companies would hire thugs, armed thugs, to beat and often kill strike organizers and people involved in strikes. Thankfully, in Victory, there is no credible evidence of violence and labor disputes, but it happened very often elsewhere. But another strike-busting strategy was to throw all the workers at the mill, even the ones who weren't striking, out of work. And the thought process behind that was that the social pressures of the people who weren't striking and didn't want to strike, they would pressure the strikers socially to go back to work and give up. Throughout the mill's history, but especially here, the gender divide was very clear. Women were usually paid just a fraction of what men were for similar work. Mule spinners, spinners who worked a special type of frame, dyers, and weavers were all male-dominated positions, and they were the ones who struck. These strikes and the concessions after them were for the benefit of the male minority of workers, and they harmed the female minority of workers. In 1871, after 20 years, C.W. Mayhew stepped down from active management at the mill. And this was definitely a loss, as his capable management has made the Victory Mill soar to new heights during his tenure. In 1881, the stockholders, Mudge and Nevins, both died. After this, young, inexperienced stockholders took control, and they began infighting and mismanaging the company. Mismanagement, combined with lingering low demand, meant that the mill was in and out of productions throughout the early 1880s, and the company went into debt. In 1882, the dyeing department shut down due to labor issues and demand issues. And here is a quote from the R.G. Dunn & Co. credit reports, those reports I visited at the Harvard Business School. I'd like to read it out for you. We think the company has been badly managed for the past 2 or 3 years, and that was in 1884. The Schuylerville mills have been shut down, and the Victory mills were in partial operations. Prospects not good. Despite this sign of severity and this almost spell of death by this credit report, the mill wouldn't fold until 1929. So it was able to endure quite efficiently. That being said, things got worse in 1886. On March 13th, 1886, the mule spunners struck, and the Victory Mills and the Horicon Mills were both thrown out of work. The Knights of Labor, a popular but very short-lived labor movement at the time, were blamed, but they denied responsibility. On September 11th, 1886, the Victory Manufacturing Company hosted a picnic for the Knights of Labor. This was a sign of either reconciliation or proactivity, depending on who you believe. And this is such a hard part about doing history, especially when you don't have definitive answers to your questions, where you have a side that will tell you a labor movement was behind this, and the side who will tell you a labor movement was not behind this. So you have to find somewhere in the middle ground. That being said, a year later, in 1887, the mule spinners struck again, the workers were thrown out, and the Knights of Labor were blamed again. The mill's prospects looked really bleak, but after this strike, the mill wouldn't fold for another 42 years. And that all resulted from some new management. The mill was in and out of productions throughout the 1880s and the 1900s. The village's population shrank from over 1,100 to under 800. In 1910, a Brooklyn-based corporation swept in to save the day. The American Manufacturing Company was founded in 1890, and it came to be a major producer of ropes, bags, and the like, and a major employer in New York City. The purchase seemed to run through some legal troubles, but with the support of State Senator Edgar Brackett, it went through, and the company took immediate action to help the situation in Victory Mills. In textbook company town fashion, the first thing the American Manufacturing Company did was improve the aging community services. They built a new community house in 1915, a new casino in 1919, and a new post office, the one that stands today, in 1925. The community house, in particular, was an amazing public amenity. It provided recreation, socialization, education, and even health care during the 1918 flu epidemic. The American Manufacturing Company retained the Victory Manufacturing Company's name for its Victory Mills location. In 1917, the American Manufacturing Company placed a large bet on Victory Mills, and it began construction of a new modern facility to supplement the existing one. The new mill would be 4 stories, it would be made from reinforced concrete, and would have wide open and well-ventilated spaces, in contrast to the old 1846 mill with cramped spaces. A new hydroelectric power plant would be built at Schuylerville to power the new electrical equipment. This new mill opened in 1918. The textile mills at Victory had gone through global, local, economic depressions, the Civil War and World War I, and stiff labor resistance. And through all of that, it had survived. But by 1920, the mill was just simply not economical, or so the American Manufacturing Company claimed. Pre-Civil War and directly after, the Northeast held a near monopoly on the textile industry. Following the expansions of the railroads to the South around the 1880s, more and more entrepreneurs began building mills in the South. Southern mills were closer to the cotton crop. Raw cotton was about 15% cheaper down south than it was in Victory. It was closer to coal, which supplanted water power as the primary source of power for mills. And it was closer to cheap, non-unionized labor. Sometime in the 1920s, the South overtook New England as the largest producer of textiles. And mills in New England began to fold as they couldn't compete with the mills in the South and increasingly with mills abroad in China and India. The combination of labor issues, unoptimized economics, and domestic and foreign competition put pressure on the American Manufacturing Company. And in 1928, they decided to pull the plug on Victory Mills. In early 1928, 10 years after the new mill was completed, plans were made to relocate south. 2 new mills were to be built in Guntersville and Albertville in North Alabama. These were mill towns close to each other and close to the Tennessee River. The mill at Guntersville is much better reported. Saratoga Victory Mills was formed as a new company in Delaware, and all the positions of the Victory branch of the American Manufacturing Company were handed over. The mill at Guntersville was not very successful. The company was unable to pay off its mortgage, and it ran a deficit for a while. The mills ran into significant labor trouble in the 1930s, and it changed hands numerous times, first in 1944 and then in 1949. And the mill at Guntersville permanently closed down in 1984 and currently holds a resale store. And the mill at Albertville is now a warehouse. Machinery from the Victory Mills were shipped to Alabama in September 1928. The original plan was to maintain half capacity, but the employee number quickly fell below half, below 200. Silk working machinery was brought in March 1929, and it kept 120 employed. But silk production was unprofitable, and the mill didn't make it to winter. On September 27th, 1929, the Washington County Post reported, Victory Mills plant entirely down. For the first time in 80 years, the entire spinning, carding, and weaving departments of the Victory Mills branch of the American Manufacturing Company have ceased to function. In March 1929, an Albany newspaper published an article about a dying village, one with rampant unemployment, no business, and no future. The people of Victory fought back viciously with this counterpiece in the Saratogian. And without its mill, Victory still survived. The village shrank below 500 people in 1930, but prospects began to increase. From 1937 to 2000, the 1918 edition of the mill functioned as a paper processing plant under a number of different companies, breathing life into the village. Although since then, much has changed. Different parts of the village came down in stages. The Horicon Mill in Schuylerville came down in 1931. Starting in the 1950s, tenant houses, apartments, the community house, and the casino all came down. The rails were pulled up in 1957, and the station was demolished sometime around 1990. 1990. The original 1846 mill and its extensions were torn down in the late 1980s. So, from a prosperous company town in the 19th century to a struggling one in the early 20th, from a paper mill to a real estate opportunity, and from a landmark to rubble, the village of Victory has endured. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
I may have missed it, but when was the conversion from textiles to paper? Who
So,
made that conversion? How did that happen?
so the textile mill closed down in 1929, and it sat vacant until 1937. After that, I can find the name of the company for you, but it was converted by a company to a packaging plant that made paper products. Let me see if I can find that company for you. It was by the United Board and Carton Company in 1937.
And who were those investors? The same, the investors that were in the textile business when it failed, or somebody new?
They're completely different investors. I'm not sure exactly where those investors came from.
United Board and Carton, did you say?
United Board and Carton
They
Company.
had a big plant up in Thompson too, right?
They did.
I'm curious about the Civil War period and how cotton got up here.
So
All
yeah, it was
supplies to the mills.
it was very rough. Most cotton production plummeted during the Civil War. It came almost to zero. Luckily, the company held a large stockpile of cotton, so it was able to maintain production for at least limited production throughout the duration of the war. Any other questions? Yes.
I think that during the Civil War, wool became very important.
It did.
And there were areas in Vermont, for instance, which manufactured wool and used in the Civil War.
Yeah, I'm not sure of any evidence for victory of that, but it could have very been possible that the manufacturing company started producing wool products. Any other questions? If not, my email's up there, nicksisto05@gmail. I'm happy to answer any questions you have over email, and all this information will be up. I see some. All this information will be up on the Brookside website.